In the world of hypothesizing about Boruto theories, sometimes you hit and sometimes you miss. And while the last 12 or so chapters of Boruto have given us a lot to theorize about, but not a whole lot to confirm about, Chapter 13 took an entirely different approach. See, while Chapter 13 didn't give us a whole lot to theorize about, it gave us a whole lot of confirmations on old and possible theories. See, Chapter 13 Two Blue Vortex was a much-needed yap fest. A slew of long-needed exposition finally given to us, the incredibly information-deprived readers. See, because while not technically a whole lot happened to this chapter, we did get a couple of very important flashbacks that gave us some massively important exposition, mostly revolving around Kashin Koji and Boruto's relationship. And while this exposition confirmed some of the theories I had about Kashin Koji, it also denied a couple of theories I had about where Kashin Koji and Boruto were training and what they were up to. And I'm gonna be 100% real with you. Out of all of the chapters of Two Blue Vortex, I think this one might have been my least favorite. And while I wish I could sit here and say that it was 100% because of the writing, a small part of me needs to identify the bias that it's probably at least partially due to the fact that some of my favorite theories were destroyed. But even if this isn't my favorite chapter of Two Blue Vortex we've ever gotten, that doesn't mean it wasn't very good, because it was. It's just the end of this chapter brings the manga towards a direction I didn't think Kishimoto was gonna head, and I don't know exactly how he's gonna land this trick. Well, it's not like he's ended the chapter with Boruto tied to a post with a gun to his temple. It's basically how he's ended the chapter. And honestly, the thought of Boruto returning to Konoha in really any permanent capacity whatsoever just hadn't really seemed like a possibility until this chapter. And obviously, I'm not the person writing the manga. If I was hypothetically the person writing the manga, this probably isn't the direction that I would have gone. But I am substantially ahead of myself. Before we even begin to broach on how I would have approached this chapter, let's first talk about the chapter. Because this chapter not only revealed how the Shinju were created, it revealed that Kashin Koji is a future sight Shinjutsu, and that there's an additional Shinju, who's almost definitely somebody we all know and love. So long before we begin to theorize or talk about how we would have approached the chapter differently, we got some things to break down. So with no further ado, let's get into Chapter 13 of Boruto's Two Blue Vortex Explained. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're feeling particularly generous, go ahead and follow my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime and manga. Or if you want to see me try to bring real-life challenges to the anime world, go ahead and follow the brand new project that I just created with Stephen Heat, Chris Barnett, and Danny Mata called Anime IRL. Or if you just want to hear me talk about anime and manga, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Talk is Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. For those of you wondering, hey Nick, where are you? My childhood home. My birthday's in a couple of days, and I'm celebrating it with my family. First and foremost, work gets done for you, my adoring audience. So let's get it done. Chapter 13 starts off exactly where Chapter 12 left off, with Jura several miles from Konoha, staring into the middle of it with his Rinnegan sniper eye. And from this distance, he's watching Boruto, laid out on the ground, as Sumere's trying to shake him into consciousness. And we see that Jura's not only just watching Boruto, trying to get this new revolutionary treatment of if I shake you enough, you'll wake up, but he's also charging up another shot, another tailed beast sniper shot. And while he's charging up this shot to presumably end Boruto's life, he's thinking, oh, he was such a funny little boy. It's going to be such a shame to see him go. But he still says goodbye, Boruto Otsutsuki. However, before Jura is able to fire off his final shot and end the story 12 chapters into part 2, Bug pops out of his cloak, which confirms something we kind of already knew, but not necessarily. And that is that not only can all of the Shinju use the claw mark Shinjutsu, which has now been confirmed to be a Shinjutsu of this chapter, we'll get into that in a second, but also all of the claw mark-esque clothes we see on all of the Shinju can be used as a way to bring others forward. While this was loosely implied by all of the claw marks on the claw grimes, I don't know if it was ever necessarily confirmed until this moment. However, as Bug pops out of Jura's cloak, he says, oh, did I get in your way? And the reason he says this is because when Bug pops out of Jura's cloak, Jura stops creating his sniper bullet that's about to finish off Boruto. But Bug comes bearing news, and that news is that Boruto has somehow found a way to get somebody to help him. That is to say that the Shinju have been researching Boruto, and they've realized that there's no way he's working independently, and that they know that there's somebody behind a curtain somewhere helping him. Now, Jura has this entire conversation with Bug while staring at Boruto's unconscious body from miles away. Then Jura goes on to say okay, well, as for the Soul Thorn, was it his informant who told him about that? At this point, that Bug realizes that Jura's holding on to a Soul Thorn. And he says, oh, you're the one with the Soul Thorn? Wait, did Hidari die? And it's like, yeah, dude, catch up. That was like a month ago. And it's at this point that Jura confirms with Bug that, yeah, Hidari is dead. Our opponent is no slouch. Then, fortunately for Sumire and Boruto and all of us Boruto readers, Jura realizes, oh, these things rot if they're left alone for too long. So, rather conveniently, he's like, hey, let's head back to the Shinju hideout. Like, sure, it'd only take a couple of seconds to finish up Boruto, but hey, listen, we gotta get this fruit back in the fridge. Jura, then watching Boruto's body from a distance, then says, you're incredibly lucky, Boruto. It's as though the heavens are urging you to stay alive. Is this what they call divine intervention? And it's like, hey man, you're the one making him lucky right now. Like, you're the one actively not killing him. You literally have him in your sniper scope, and you're like, yeah, I know, I left the stove on. I gotta get back. Now, to this point that the clearly unconscious Boruto is having some kind of dream, which is a flashback of how he met Kashin Koji. And we see in this flashback that Boruto, presumably about 1 year into the time skip, with long hair that makes him look a lot like Sasuke. Like, I get that you spent a year with him. Doesn't mean you have to cop his flow. But we see that Boruto is backed into the dead end of a cave, as about 20 or so ninja from some village are looking for him. And it appears as though Boruto is about to have to cut down these innocent ninja to get out of the situation. That is until behind him appears a toad. A toad that tells Boruto, I did a quick check. There's about 20 of them, and we don't need to kill the innocents. Boruto then, rather naturally, is confused by the fact that a toad is talking to him about how many ninja are in this cave, and goes to draw his sword. However, the toad assures him, I'm not a foe. He tells him, if I was a foe, I'd be talking to the 20 other ninja that are in this cave, and I'd be telling them where you are, but I haven't done that yet. So Boruto continues to have this conversation with a toad, 10 or so feet from 20 ninjas, who for some reason can't hear it, as Boruto asks this toad, what do you want from me? And the toad responds by saying, let's get you out of here first, and then we can talk, which is more intelligent. Now, Boruto is obviously apprehensive of this because why would you go with the talking toad? But then the toad brings up a pretty good point by saying, hey, anywhere is better than your current situation, friend. And then really decides to cut deep by saying, what, would you not like toads? Are you weird about toads or something? Now, to this point, the Kashin Koji tells Boruto to do something rather interesting, something we've never seen happen before, and says, put your hand on the back of this toad. To which Boruto does. Boruto then, after placing his hand on the back of this toad, is summoned to Kashin Koji, who summons the toad that Boruto is touching. Now, while this might seem like a common sense thing to do, like, oh, obviously, if you're in contact with the thing being summoned, you go along with the summoning. We've never really, to my knowledge, seen that happen. I mean, that is essentially using flying Raijin. Boruto is transported from one area to another instantaneously using the teleportation jutsu. And all he had to do was be in contact with a summoning animal that was being summoned to a certain location. If I'm correct, that would mean that any contact with a summoning animal who's being summoned would allow you to travel anywhere instantaneously, so long as the summoner was at that location. Which means this is probably a more effective mode of transportation between one point and another than even the 3-person flying Raijin that's taught to the Hokage guard. And thus, just like that, Boruto is immediately transported to what appears to be one of Orochimaru's lairs. And waiting for him there is Kashin Koji. And thus immediately Boruto looks around and says, where are we? At which point Kashin Koji delivers me the worst news I've had in months, when he says we're outside of the Land of Wind, in one of Orochimaru's abandoned lairs, and that he used genjutsu to make the entrance of this lair incredibly hard to find, meaning that nobody should ever really find them here, which means no mention of Orochimaru and that the worst possible future has come to pass. Kashin Koji and Boruto are just using one of Orochimaru's lairs, which I understood was a possibility, and I highlighted it multiple times because of that, but it was the worst future out of all of the possibilities, so I was actively rooting against it. And yet, it's come to pass. I mean, obviously, it's incredibly convenient for somebody who's on the run. I mean, that's why Orochimaru made him in the first place, is because they were on the run. And to this point, the Kashin Koji also continues to give us a little bit of exposition about him and his frogs and how they work. Going on to say that, by the way, the frog is a scientific ninja tool, and that wasn't the frog talking, that was me talking through the frog. Now, to this point, that Boruto looks at Kashin Koji and says, who are you? Do you know me? And the childhood genius somehow doesn't realize that Kashin Koji is Kashin Koji until he lifts up his own mask and puts it in front of his face. But then again, considering the fact that people don't recognize me when I'm not wearing my glasses out and about, makes me feel as though this isn't the craziest thing of all time. Kashin Koji then goes on to tell Boruto all the things that we already know, that Kashin Koji is a cyborg created by Amado, at which point Boruto gets incredibly mad because Kashin Koji killed Ao and tried to kill Konohamaru, and then Kashin Koji says, yeah, all right, enough of the formalities here, I get it, I tried to kill everybody who's near and dear to you, let's confirm a couple of things here. Kashin Koji says, Boruto, from the moment you were born, Be honest with me. I need to confirm something to confirm your identity, so answer as honestly as possible. Now, it's at this point that Boruto begins to realize that Kashin Koji might know about omnipotence. And when he asks Kashin Koji about that, he simply mutters omnipotence. He then goes on to say, and this might be because I'm reading the fan translation, "You're inside of me," which I doubt the official translation will feature. Basically, what I believe Kashin Koji is trying to say here, as a native English speaker, is that basically Kashin Koji understands that his memories for Kawaki and Boruto have been swapped, as he goes on to say that Boruto's Ishiki vessel fled Kara. That is to say that Boruto and Kawaki's roles are swapped in his mind based off the memories he has. And the memories he has of Kawaki are rather obviously Kawaki being Ishiki's vessel and Kawaki fleeing from Kara. And more importantly than any of that, the fact that Amado and Kashin Koji helped him flee Kara. Kashin Koji then goes on to say, "I don't know that much about omnipotence, but I do understand the consequences that it is reap." And therefore, Kashin Koji goes on to talk about how on the day omnipotence was fired, it truly seemed as though Boruto was chased out of his own village. But all this confuses Boruto, because everybody he's interacted with since omnipotence has had their memories altered. And it appears as though the same things happened to Kashin Koji, but Kashin Koji is aware of it. And it's at this point that Kashin Koji tells Boruto something very interesting, something very important, and something that I hypothesized. See, in my video, Kashin Koji has future sight, nailed it. I talked about the fact that Kashin Koji appears to know too much given too little evidence as far as we are in the story. See, Kashin Koji not only knew about the Shinju before they were created, but also knew about the Soul Thorn before we ever saw one. And therefore, while I identified that there was a possibility that Kashin Koji had fought and defeated a Shinju prior to the reveal of the 4 Shinju that we're currently dealing with, now 5, I deemed that it was not only more fun, but also more likely that Kashin Koji had some form of future sight. Now, while I did identify in that video that Kashin Koji most likely got this future sight from the Great Toad Sage, as he is an amalgamation of a perfect sage created from Jiraiya's DNA. I have since in a previous video, in fact the last video we posted on this channel, talked about how it's a likely possibility that Shinjutsu from Shibai have been implanted in other people we don't yet know about. Kashin Koji and Boruto being the 2 people in question. So, you know, take a couple of pieces and it works out. It's not my best work yet, but it's all right. I nailed the future sight thing. I'm gonna take that, all right? How was I supposed to know he was gonna get a Shinjutsu from Shibai called 10 Paths? Now, to this point, the Kashin Koji begins his apology tour, and he basically says, "I haven't apologized yet. I'm so sorry. In order to outwit the Otsutskis, I had to be convincing in my mission." And Boruto pretty immediately forgives him, as he himself is a shinobi, and therefore he understands the consequences and the actions necessary to be a convincing shinobi. Kashin Koji then goes on to say, "As you know by now, I was created by Amado for the sole purpose of destroying Ishiki, and that by destroying Ishiki, I would stop the devastation of this planet through the medium of a divine tree and a chakra fruit." However, Kashin Koji goes on to say, "Even though I was specifically built to destroy Ishiki, his power was beyond even my wildest imagination. And yet when I destroyed Jigen, I understood that my role was done, and that I could entrust the rest to the Hokage." However, as Kashin Koji was laying there in that temple thing he fought Jigen in, waiting for death, in that moment, he awoke to a new jutsu. But not just a jutsu, but a Shinjutsu. See, in this moment where Kashin Koji was on the brink of death, we see reels of film flying across his face. And these reels of film are revealing to him in that moment, moments that would have been from the future as of Jigen and Kashin Koji's fight. Things like Kawaki's reawakening of his karma marking, things like Baryon mode, things like Ishiki's death. Kashin Koji then tells Boruto, "In the moment that should have been my death, events started flashing before my eyes, and I had a hunch that these events would come to pass." And this entire page that we're given shows us events from part 1 of Boruto, be they Ishiki's death, Code's rise to power, or the firing of omnipotence. However, on the next page, it's revealed that his visions went even further than that, as Kashin Koji also saw the creation of the Shinju. However, he didn't just see the creation of 4 Shinju, but 5. See, obviously there's Hidari, Jura, Bug, and Moegi. However, in the back, behind all 4 of them, there exists a 5th Shinju, who is 100% Baryon mode Naruto. And that's bad. That's bad for everyone. Now, a lot of you might be asking the question, well, hold up, there's only 4 Shinju. If he's seeing the future, why is he seeing 5 Shinju? Why is he seeing Baryon mode Naruto Shinju? And considering the fact that Kashin Koji sees all possible futures, and he elaborates on this in a second, he could have at that moment, and still probably could come to the conclusion that this future that he was seeing that had Baryon mode Naruto as a Shinju hadn't come to pass and won't come to pass. And honestly, that's still a possibility. There is a possibility that this future we see with Naruto as a Shinju will not happen. However, it feels as though the reveal, as there's specifically a panel that focuses on this Shinju that is 100% Naruto, is going to happen, especially based off how this chapter ends. But that raises a couple of questions, the most important of which being, how? Naruto wasn't bitten by a claw grime. He's floating in the Daikokuten currently, and there's no claw grimes there, at least so far as we know. And considering the fact that we saw Kawaki pop into the Daikokuten to check up on Hinata and Naruto in Chapter 1 of Two Blue Vortex, and he wasn't a tree then, it seems as though the possibility of Boruto being bit by a claw grime being turned into a Shinju seems unlikely. And thus, in actuality, if a future is to come about of Naruto being a Shinju, there has to be some other way this happened. And answering that question is what we're going to be doing in Thursday's video. You thought I was going to do a theory video inside of a breakdown video. You don't know me well enough, so make sure you hit the noti bell. Kashin Koji then goes on to say that the 10 Tails must be destroyed. So long as the 10 Tails still exist, the planet remains at risk. And that's the reason that Kashin Koji didn't end up giving his life in the final battle against Ishiki, is because he realized that there was more work to be done. He was created with the sole purpose of making sure that Earth wasn't destroyed through the medium of a divine tree and a chakra fruit. However, he realized in the moment of his death that that job wasn't completed yet, and thus he needed to get out of the battle against Ishiki and keep on living. Kashin Koji then goes on to elaborate by connecting the future he saw with what was currently happening in his own reality. He was able to deepen his understanding of this newfound Shinjutsu. Boruto then interjects and says, I'm going to make this about me again real quick. It's not called Kashin Koji, it's called Boruto. It says, omnipotence. It switched I and Kawaki's positions. Did you foresee that happening? And it's like, yeah, man, he said that like 12 pages ago. And Kashin Koji says, yes, I did see it coming, but I was only convinced of it actually happening after I've talked to you just now. Boruto then decides, okay, that's enough me time, and says, how did you acquire this ability? What is it? To which we get a confirmation of another theory that I've been cooking up for the last couple of weeks, which is that Shibai's Shinjutsu are probably more evenly spread than even we know. See, obviously we've been hypothesizing about a counter to the Senrigan for a long time. It didn't make sense that Shibai, the all-powerful god who had a technique as powerful as Senrigan and omnipotence, wouldn't have something that also allowed him to look into the future. And while we did hypothesize that it'd probably be a dojutsu counterbalance, it's not, apparently. So Kashin Koji goes on to say that you've probably heard from Amino about Shibai. He once devoured the life of several planets and acquired all Shinju, becoming what was known in the Otsutsuki as a god. Kashin Koji then goes on to say that all the members of Karo were given augmentations from Shibai. That is to say that every member of Kara got Shibai's cells transplanted into them, and that the goal of these transplants was to manifest one of Shibai's many Shinjutsu. However, as to whether or not you'd be able to tap into the powers of Shibai after getting his cells was kind of up to luck, and therefore, as a result, Code got the claw marks, which is another thing we've been talking about recently. We've been hypothesizing about how Code got his claw marks. It's not really established, and the fact that all of the Shinju have the claw marks and they channel them through their Rinnegan was slightly suspicious, and therefore we hypothesized that the claw marks were Shinjutsu taken from Shibai's body. That one I did get. Pat on the back, me. Daemon got Reflection, and Ada got the Senrigan. However, that means Boro, Delta, and Kashin Koji didn't manifest any Shinjutsu. When Jigen or Ishiki cornered Kashin Koji and he was on the brink of death, his Shinjutsu manifested. And his Shinjutsu is called 10 Directions. So now in this moment, Kashin Koji awoke the ability to see all possible futures. And it's at this point that Kashin Koji elaborates that the future is not linear. In fact, there's infinite possibilities, and Kashin Koji is privy to all of them. And honestly, which one of these futures is going to happen, he can't necessarily say. And it's at this point that he goes on to tell us about timelines that have already been avoided. Like a timeline where Naruto loses to Ishiki, where Ishiki is reincarnated inside of Kawaki and Earth is destroyed. And there was another timeline on the day that Naruto and Hinata were warped into the Daikokuten by Kawaki, that Boruto and Kawaki were allowed to fight out the entirety of their battle. However, because Kawaki was so much more powerful than Boruto at this moment, Boruto loses, and Sarada tries to step into this battle, and she also dies. However, because Code got his limiters removed, Code was stronger than Kawaki, and so Code mercilessly beats Kawaki and then feeds Boruto to the 10 Tails, the tree is made, and the Earth is once again destroyed. Now, Kashin Koji goes on to elaborate that all of these possibilities were highly likely. In fact, the future they're currently living in, the one that hasn't seen the Earth destroyed, was incredibly unlikely. And therefore, in this future, this good future, they're walking an incredibly continuously dangerous tightrope. Now, Boruto can't necessarily understand any of this because it's crazy when said out loud. However, Boruto acknowledges the fact that he can't overlook the fact that Kashin Koji was able to figure out what was going on with omnipotence. And thus, Boruto decides to believe what Kashin Koji's talking about. However, at the end of the day, Boruto acknowledges the fact that being able to see an infinite amount of futures isn't technically that helpful, especially when you consider the fact that the least likely possibility appeared to be the one that happened. So at the end of the day, Boruto kind of establishes the fact that whatever will be. And at this point, the Kashin Koji acknowledges the fact, yeah, you're right. However, the biggest advantage of being able to see the future is information gathering. Because I'm able to see the future, we'll be able to avoid dead ends like the one I just found you in. On top of this, Kashin Koji tells Boruto that any skills or abilities he has in the future, he can teach him now. And it's at this point that Boruto does my least favorite thing he's ever done and just goes, oh, that's totally cool. Believe it. And then he corrects himself and he's like, no, that's cool. Thanks for that. I'll make him Datebeo. What are we doing here? Now, to this point, the Kashin Koji is like, oh, there's going to be some nerds who are reading this manga who are going to be like,
oh, well, how are you able to teach him abilities from the future? Because that would mean there's a paradoxical time loop thing happening right now. Because he wouldn't learn the abilities in the future if you teach them to him now, and blah, 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 blah.
It's me, I'm the problem. And so he, in one incredibly vague and hand-wavy way, says there's no chronological contradictions. I'm just going to tell you what I saw from the future, and you're welcome to do with it as you please. In fact, apparently, one of the biggest strengths of the 10 Directions is this exact thing. He then goes on to say that there's also a way to save Sasuke from the tree, but we'll explain that later. And by later, he means not this chapter. But before we get into this information that I'm not going to give you this chapter, we should talk about the worst possible future. And apparently, the worst possible future is also kind of the future we're living in. See, in this future, the Ten Tails breaks free from Code's control, and then attains new evolution. Now, this basically all but confirms that the Shinju, but most notably Jura, is the Ten Tails. I always say every chapter that this basically confirms that Jura is the Ten Tails. I mean, the evidence is mounting. Now, Kashin Koji goes on to say, in this worst possible future, multiple humanoid Shinju will appear and mount an offensive against us and the planet. However, so long as we can remove the source of the Ten Tails, everything will be alright, which is why in the early chapters of Two Blue Vortex, Boruto is trying to find the Ten Tails and destroy it. Now, Kashin Koji says that the likelihood of destroying the Ten Tails is low, which is why he wasn't super devastated that Boruto wasn't able to destroy the Ten Tails, because it was likely. However, Kashin Koji goes on to say that the most dangerous of the humanoid Shinju that will appear is one by the name of Jura, their leader. Kashin Koji then continues on to say by saying, Boruto, you will be killed by Jura. And then he goes, but that's basically all you need to know. I mean, you just get killed by Jura in most futures, but don't worry about it. However, Kashin Koji goes on to elaborate that in all these futures where Boruto is killed by Jura, the following events are pretty similar. Kawaki preys on his body and the planet is destroyed. And thus Kashin Koji says that we must never let this terrible future come to pass. We gotta work together to make sure you don't die and the planet doesn't die. Which is also why Kashin Koji was so upset when Boruto put himself in the situation against the four Shinju in the beginning chapters of Two Blue Vortex, because he knew what would happen if Boruto died in that moment at the hands of Jura. However, Kashin Koji says that our future changes with everything we do, so we just gotta put our nose to the grindstone. It's at this point that Boruto says, I don't know what we need to do to stop the Shinju project. However, if it boils down to killing Kawaki, I won't do it. Boruto then tells Kashin Koji that his goal is to wake his stupid brother up and get the Uzumaki family back together once and for all. So not only did he get the Datebeo from his father, he also got the willingness to forgive and forget. Boruto then pulls out Sasuke's headband and says, wherever I go, this Ten Tails is a problem. And as he ties on Sasuke's headband, he says, the Ten Tails code, whatever it is, I'll clean it up. And it's at this point that the flashback ends and we cut back to Boruto getting his cutting-edge medical treatment from Sumire, the Shakeathon. We also see that Sarada's not exactly crushing it as she has a hole through her forearm. And while it didn't hit her bone, the tailed beast ball sniper bullet might actually be eating away at her cells. We also then cut to Himawari, who wakes up. Himawari then immediately dashes away from the sensory ninja who was holding onto her as she sees that Sarada's injured. So she immediately runs over to Sarada, grabs her arm, and heals it using her newfound Jinchuriki Shinju Ninja Jesus ability that she clearly got from her father. And Sarada is immediately healed. Now, this obviously confuses everyone as Konohamaru looks to her and is like, how did you do that? And she just responds by saying, well, it's because the injury was minor, forgetting the fact that she fixed a cannonball-sized hole in Inujin's chest. And Sumire immediately turns to Himawari, realizing that her shake no jutsu isn't working, and says, yeah, no, do that to Boruto. I'm shaking him, but nothing's happened. Now, this catches Himawari off guard, as she didn't even realize that Boruto was back. Mind you, she was unconscious before Boruto picked her up a couple of chapters ago. But Kawaki, deciding to be just the worst, says, Himawari, wait, don't go over there. don't move the plot forward, and says, don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you to heal him. Let's just get something out of the way first. So Konohamaru, who's also just become the worst, says you're right. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And tells Sumire to move out of the way because big useless is coming through. So Konohamaru pulls out jutsu sealing handcuffs, apparently created by Amado. Good idea, if you ask me. I mean, all we had previous to this, the sealed ninja, was the jutsu that they put on them in that prison arc that stopped them from using all jutsu. But now they got big old blocky sea prism stone handcuffs. So the unconscious and now multi-orificed Boruto laying on the ground gets handcuffed, which is, very in line with American policing. However, it doesn't end here. As Sarada, Sumire, and Himawari tell Kawaki and Konohamaru to get off Boruto, they say they're not gonna miss this opportunity. And they tell them to not complain, as this is a natural measure. I mean, why wouldn't we take this opportunity to lock away one of the most dangerous criminals on Earth? But they don't stop there, as Kawaki also reaches into Boruto's cloak and grabs Kashin Koji's toad and makes it disappear. He squeezes it, maybe. Honestly, it's hard to tell. Kashin Koji also could have just popped it. We then see Kashin Koji in the Orochimaru hideout saying, this is troublesome. Which means that more than likely Kashin Koji's gonna have to pop by in the next couple of chapters, do a little shopping trip at Konoha and grab Boruto. And it's this point that we cut back to the Shinju, who are placing Hidari's soul thorn on the giant black box in the middle of the Shinju hideout. Now, it's at this point that we see the design on the top of this box, and the design on the top of this box is rather interesting. It's 3 circles inside of each other with 9 dots on the outside. Now, this design is a clear reference to the Rinne Sharingan, with the 3 concentric circles of the Rinnegan and the 9 Tomei. Now, after placing the soul thorn in the center of the smallest circle, the presumably divine tree around the Shinju's hideout begins to recreate Hidari, almost immediately. And it doesn't just recreate the form of Hidari, it brings back all aspects of Hidari. He remembers that he died, he remembers who he is, he remembers his role. His identity is still 100% intact. Now, it's at this point that the Moegi Shinju cuts into the conversation and says, all right, Jared, that's enough, right? And at this point that she draws our attention to another soul thorn. And she says, look, there it is. I'm itching to see it. And it's this point that we focus in on the soul thorn. And Moegi says, I wonder what kind of person will come out. To which Jura responds by saying, I don't care. Harvest. Now, it's at this point that something rather interesting happens. See, it appears as though Moegi controls the roots of what I thought was the divine tree to cut down the soul thorn. Now, this tracks, obviously. We know that Moegi has yin-yang release and has been able to combine earth and water release to recreate a much weaker, diluted version of wood release. And therefore, one of the reasons we possibly tied back to the fact that Jura and the rest of the Shinju seem to be able to use wood release in a strong capacity was either because they are walking divine trees and are therefore able to control divine trees, or possibly the jutsus of all of the Shinju are spread about all of the Shinju. And thus it appears to be likely that Moegi might actually be the person controlling the divine tree in the Shinju hideout, that she's responsible for the reconstruction of all of the injured Shinju after they're injured, and that all of the roots and the creation of new soul thorns falls into her lap, which gives her a rather interesting role amongst the Shinju when you consider the fact that her rivalry is against Konohamaru, and that's not all that interesting. Now, after Moegi cuts down this soul thorn and it falls to the center of the smallest circle, we see the roots of this tree are beginning to close in. And Moegi appears to be controlling the soul thorn and the roots to create this new Shinju, which possibly confirms what I was just talking about. Thus, the chapter ends with all 4 of the Shinju staring at the soul thorn on top of the black box, with Jura saying, I have to think of a name. And thus it appears as though in the next chapter, chapter 14 of Two Blue Vortex, we're gonna get to meet the 5th Shinju. And while we can't say for certain who the 5th Shinju is gonna be, we've only ever seen one 5th Shinju, and that was Naruto. So it seems as though the future's getting a bit bleaker for the good guys. As Juro will still be the leader of the Shinju. If you think Hidari was strong, wait until you see the Baryon mode Naruto Shinju. But as to how that happened, what abilities it'll have, and what that future will possibly look like for Konoha, well, we're going to talk about that in videos to come. But I'm curious to hear what you guys thought of this chapter, and what you think is coming down the pipe for Boruto. So tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. I'm going to go put my toesy woesies in the sand.